Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the September edition of Inside Immigration. Today we're joined by Associates Alexandra Cole and Alana Glintz. Please feel free to ask any questions through the pop-up text bar on your screen. If the panelists do not get to your question, you can contact them via the information provided on screen now, or you can reach out to me directly at info@gans.com. And with that being said, I'll hand things over to our panelists.
Thanks, Stephen. So first, we're just going to give you a quick update on the recent extensions of the 3 key orders in council. So the first one was the extension of the mandatory isolation period. So that's the 14-day quarantine requirement for any traveler entering Canada. So that order in council, which sets out that isolation period, was extended to October 31st. From the previous kind of end date of September 30th. So those are still in place. The order in council extending the travel prohibition for foreign nationals coming from the United States into Canada was also extended to October 21st. That was 30 days from September 21st, which was the previous end date. And the third order in council, which sets out the travel prohibition for foreign nationals traveling from countries other than the United States, was extended to October 31st. So those are 3 key updates on what's happening with the prohibitions and isolation period. Now I should note, with respect to the order in council for the mandatory isolation period, obviously there are exemptions to the quarantine requirement, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Similarly, the order in council for foreign nationals traveling from countries other than the US has a list of enumerated exemptions. That order in council basically provides a blanket prohibition on travel to Canada from people traveling from outside the US. It does have an authorization for people coming to Canada for family reunification. To receive that sort of authorization, you do need to request that from the government and receive a letter. Another common one is holders of valid work permits and work permit approval letters. Those individuals are exempted, as well as people providing essential services in Canada. When you're providing an essential service in Canada, for example, if you're applying for a new work permit or you're coming as a business visitor, the rules can differ depending on what you're doing. So you may need an authorization letter from the government, or you may not. And I'll talk a little bit about some updates to business visitors in a little bit. For travelers from the United States, the order in council just provides a prohibition for optional or discretionary travel purposes. A lot of travelers coming from the US will therefore need to show border services officers that they are coming for something that's, the word essential is used a lot, but we also just say, non-optional. And it's very frequent for someone coming from the US who is, applying for a work permit or holds a work permit, is able to show that they, need to be going to school, need to access, campus services and have in-class instruction. Those people can very often be granted entry with or without a quarantine requirement, depending on what they're doing. Both OICs, both orders in council, I think this is really important, they both have a specific exemption for travelers who are immediate family members of Canadian citizens or permanent residents. So if you are an individual who is an immediate family member and you are coming to Canada for at least 15 days, it doesn't matter if your purpose of travel is optional or non-optional, you can be coming to visit your family. That is authorized under both orders in council. But I should note that the typical immigration requirements, in any case, still need to be met. So if you're a foreign national coming to Canada as a worker or a visitor, you need to show that you're, a genuine temporary person, that you don't intend to, stay beyond the period of your stay, and that you're not inadmissible to Canada for some reason. Commonly a criminal record can sometimes render someone inadmissible. So those normal immigration requirements, outside of the context of the travel prohibitions, are still in place and should not be forgotten. Moving on to our second topic, I wanted to give you an update on business visitors traveling from countries outside of the US. Earlier in September, so earlier this month, there was a really good, I think, program delivery update from immigration, which is useful in that it clarifies which foreign nationals traveling from outside the US to perform services in Canada as business visitors are exempt from travel. Before this update, it was a little bit unclear whether or not these people needed to apply to the government for special authorization to travel to Canada. This update really sets it out very clearly. If you are coming as a business visitor and performing services as part of a warranty or sales agreement, you can come as long as you are inspecting, repairing, or maintaining equipment. So you are exempt from the travel prohibition as an essential service provider in that scenario. You do not need to get an authorization letter from the government before seeking travel and entry to Canada. The caveat to that is if you are performing installation, then you will need an authorization letter. That letter is usually issued under either or the national interest or essential service exemption. So that's a really, I think, great update that we got from IRCC to make that more clear for people who are coming from outside the US. Regarding our third topic, which is quarantine exemptions and requests, trends and updates in that regard. Right now, I mean, I don't know, who's listening and who was listening on our last webinar, but there really isn't much of an update there. What I will just reiterate is the border services officials are still the ultimate decision maker in that respect. So exemptions from the mandatory isolation period are being requested at the border upon seeking entry to Canada, and the border officer will be making that decision whether or not you are exempt. This decision is provided verbally, and if you are not granted the exemption, you pretty much have to either present a quarantine plan, so you should maybe have that kind of available just in case, or if the officer says, no, sorry, you're not exempt, you should be able to say, okay, thanks, I'm going to withdraw my entry to Canada. In some circumstances, there could be complications, but in general, that's kind of how it's going. I think because it is a verbal decision, travelers should really record information about that discussion and have maybe a written record and notes after the fact to say, this is who I spoke with, maybe record the badge number of the officer. I was confirmed quarantine exempt under, this specific exemption. And then if they're ever contacted by an authority, they'll have that information on hand. I think that's a really great way to kind of protect yourself. I think one of the most common quarantine exemptions that people are utilizing and requesting the exemption under is under 6E of the Order in Council, which sets out the mandatory isolation, and basically the Chief Public Health Officer has listed people who are considered essential. One of those, which I think is used quite frequently, is technicians and specialists who are coming into Canada for maintenance, repair, installation, inspection of equipment that is supporting critical infrastructure. There's, numerous, many companies in Canada and outside Canada who support critical infrastructure. And there are people who need to come into Canada to ensure that equipment is functioning and operations are moving as normal, to ensure that we don't have any gaps in our supply chains. So if you are a person who is supporting energy, utilities, information, IT services, finance, health, food, water, transportation, safety, government, and manufacturing, you may be able to request an exemption under those categories. It is very important, however, that there is a strong rationale for why your work is immediate and why you are unable to plan for a 14-day quarantine. So this is often tied to, disruptions in equipment, broken down equipment, contracts that need to be met, things like that. So those are some examples of when you may be exempt. So Alana, I believe, is going to just give a little bit of an update on general trends we're seeing in travel to Canada.
Thanks, Alex. I think the only thing that I would add with respect to the quarantine exemptions is that we are seeing a lot of quarantine inspections, in particular under the International Mobility Program. So as Alex mentioned, it's so important to keep detailed records regarding what happens at the border, since a lot of these requests are made there, because we are seeing quite a few of those inspections come through, and essentially they want details about why you were deemed to be exempt from the quarantine, if that was the case. So just something to have on your radar in terms of a best practice.
I think, sorry, Alana, I think that also raises, for people who aren't exempt from quarantine, who are coming in and starting work right away, maybe you've applied for a work permit at the US-Canada border, it's been granted, you're not exempt from quarantine. Companies should be aware that, they are required to start payment of that foreign national, their wage or salary during the quarantine period. So it's always important to kind of check on that and understand what your requirements are as an employer.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I mean, when it comes to the quarantine, just requirement in general, like Alex said, if someone is coming from overseas and is actually undertaking the quarantine, then in one of those inspections, immigration would be checking to make sure that they did follow their quarantine plan. So in the same way, you'd want to keep a detailed record to show that you did in fact follow the 14-day mandatory quarantine. But aside from that, and just kind of shifting gears to our next topic, with regard to traveling to Canada, we just want to provide a few trends and updates in terms of what we're seeing. So the first would be we're finding that travelers, when they're boarding their flights abroad, sometimes airlines are requesting documents to prove that they are eligible to actually board their flight to Canada. So as a best practice, you should always be preparing your client or your employee with documents to demonstrate that they're eligible to fly to Canada currently during this travel ban. As well, I mean, they should be going with a package anyways, but just kind of coaching them as to what to expect, because the process is very different from what we would see in a non-COVID environment. So, we wouldn't normally see airlines asking for these types of documents or asking for confirmation that they can board the flight to Canada. So examples of documents that prove that someone can board their flight to Canada currently would be like a work permit approval letter, proof that they have their approval and they're just traveling to Canada to activate the work permit. If the person is, say, flying from the United States and they're making their application at the border, maybe their proof is their positive labor market impact assessment. Now, keep in mind that positive labor market impact assessment is not, a letter of invitation as outlined in the order in council, which would be a document to provide to show that you can fly to Canada and that you're exempt from the travel ban. The LMIA would really only be applicable if you're flying from the United States, I would say right now. Alex, would you agree?
I'm sorry?
Would you agree that, when you're flying from the United States right now, you could maybe use an LMIA as proof that you could come to Canada? But that would be about the only time I think that would be appropriate right now.
Right. I mean, not from outside the US. Flying from the US, you can apply for a work permit, with just having, an application package and coming to the border. At the airport, you can apply for a work permit. So I believe, in the same way, having an LMIA-based work permit package from the US is fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's about the only time we're seeing that right now with the travel ban. So if you're flying from anywhere else, I mean, you're really going to want to have a work permit approval letter, your original work permit if you already have a work permit, maybe a family reunification letter that was received from immigration because you're flying to Canada to join someone who's already here on a work permit, for example, or any of the other documents that might indicate that you are currently exempt from the travel ban. But those are the types of things that an airline official might be asking just in order to give the boarding pass, just to confirm. The other update that we wanted to provide was with respect to open spousal work permits. So this is a spouse, whether it's married or common law, who's accompanying someone who's on a valid work permit in Canada that is at a skill level NOC O, A, or B with a duration of longer than 6 months. So there is still that ongoing kind of pilot project allowing for the granting of open spousal work permits for those individuals. What we're seeing sometimes when individuals are flying into Canada is that sometimes the officers are not issuing those open spousal work permits and are instead just allowing people to enter as visitors. And then they're having to apply for their open spousal work permits once they're already in Canada. We're seeing this, just somewhat frequently, where the officers are basically saying, if you don't have a job offer, given everything that's going on with COVID, we're not issuing open spousal work permits. Now, we have been asking for a bit more guidance on this, and it seems that there might be a change coming there soon, but I think it's important to prepare clients before they travel that there may not necessarily be an open spousal work permit issued when they arrive just during this travel ban. We are seeing some pushback on that at the airport.
And I will say it's not in every case. I mean, a lot of the time the open spousal work permit is issued to the spouse. So it's kind of, one of those things where you should be ready for it, but it's not necessarily going to happen. It may be, a vestige of someone right now who has an IEC, so an International Experience Canada approval letter under, the Working Holiday Program, for example, which is an open work permit, cannot come unless they do demonstrate that they have a job offer. So it might be something linked to that. As Alana said, we're hoping to see some guidance on that soon.
Yeah, for sure. Just shifting gears to our next topic. So just wanted to provide an update with respect to the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, LMIAs. So we did receive a couple updates just recently. The first is with respect to the duration. So for each LMIA, there's typically a duration listed, and that duration is kind of separate from what your approval is for the work permit duration, but the duration in order to use the LMIA, so the validity period that you have to use that positive LMIA, either to apply for a work permit or to use it in your permanent residence application potentially, there's typically an expiration date listed on the LMIA. So usually in a non-COVID environment, it was 6 months. During the pandemic, we have been seeing a change to 9 months instead, and that was mostly in acknowledging the fact that workers were, it's taking a bit longer to get here because of various travel bans and other restrictions, depending on where they're coming from. We've received notice that now the duration is going back to 6 months, so we will no longer be seeing that 9-month duration on LMIAs issued, and the effective date of this is September 30th. So as of September 30th, we can understand that there's going to be a 6-month duration on that LMIA. So anything received prior, Service Canada has basically said it will continue to be 9 months, but the effective date would be September 30th. Another update, Service Canada has advised that they will no longer be accepting applications by way of email submission. So the email submission option, again, was something else that came about during the pandemic. So usually you would have to submit an LMIA application either by fax, by paper, or online. So the online portal hasn't been out too long, but it is something that was available before the pandemic started. But Service Canada was allowing applications to be submitted by email in the interim. They've advised that eventually that will no longer be an option, and we'll have to go back to the regular ways to submit. So again, fax, mail. I think mail is not a very popular option, but it is still an option. And then their online portal, which they are really promoting and trying to get employers and third parties to use. So you can expect that at some point, date is to be determined, but at some point they're no longer going to be accepting those email submissions. And just in terms of general processing times, for regular high-wage LMIA applications, the current posted processing time is 66 business days. Of course, this is subject to change without notice, and we do see a little bit of variance depending on the province in which the application is submitted. So it kind of depends where you're submitting, but that is the posted processing time. We are still seeing some expedited processing for certain occupations, which is listed on Service Canada's website. These are mostly occupations that are kind of active in the fight against COVID. So you're seeing a lot of kind of healthcare professionals, supply chain industry professionals, etc. So just something to have on your radar in terms of processing times. For the global talent stream, the current posted processing time is 13 business days, which I would say is quite accurate. It's still, just about 2 weeks to see decisions on the global talent stream application. So those do move quite quickly still, which is great. That's about it in terms of updates on the temporary foreign worker program. And just the final piece that we wanted to touch on were some updates to the processing of spousal sponsorship applications. So late last week, we received an update from Immigration basically indicating their intention to speed up the spousal sponsorship application process, and in particular their processing times. The posted processing time is still about 1 year, but they're looking to speed things up, basically again acknowledging the fact that families are separated, and there's a clear interest to move these applications along. In respect to kind of their strategy for moving things along, they've indicated that they're going to have additional officers assigned to these types of files. So they actually said that they're going to increase the number of officers by 66%. So it's quite substantial in terms of their allocation of officers dealing with these files specifically, so that would help with the processing times. They also have some technology that's being incorporated that should also help. So the online option to submit applications is helpful for that, as well as they're going to be piloting in a few weeks the option to have interviews conducted remotely, which should also help with some of the processing times, just in terms of moving things along and not necessarily having to wait for an appointment to go physically into an office. So that should be helpful. Aside from that, we are already seeing movement on these applications. Some applications that were submitted kind of pre-pandemic, we're starting to see more correspondence come through even since this announcement came out last week. So we're getting medical requests, etc. So those are all good signs. And then in terms of a statistic that was provided, it looks like Immigration intends to prioritize and finalize approximately 6,000 spousal sponsorships each month from October until December 2020. So that's great news. But yeah, that's about it in terms of our update on spousal sponsorships. We do have some time for questions and answers. Just going to take a look here.
So I see there's a question here, which I think is quite relevant. Would foreign nationals who are work permit exempt under Regulation 186, which outlines business visitors, from a country other than the United States be permitted to enter Canada in the new year? So again, I'll just read that. Would foreign nationals who are work permit exempt under Section Regulation 186 from a country other than the United States be permitted to enter Canada in the new year? So this is relevant because it's kind of what we were talking about with respect to business visitors who are providing an essential service. And what the government is currently saying is that a business visitor traveling from a country other than the United States can travel and is exempt from the prohibition if they're performing certain services. So if it's a technician or specialist who's inspecting, repairing, or maintaining equipment as part of an existing warranty or sales agreement, and is supporting critical infrastructure, that person is exempt and does not need any special authorization to come to Canada. The other category, which I didn't previously speak about, is people who are working in commercial or research, open water, agriculture related activities. So that can be people like captains, deckhands, inspectors, scientists, veterinarians. Those people are also falling into this category of individuals who are exempt. If you are a work permit exempt for a national, that falls into another category under Regulation 186 of the Immigration and Refugee Regulations. You may be allowed to travel if you obtain a national interest exemption letter from the government. So you would need to make a specific request to the government before attempting to travel. And if they agree that you are someone who's important enough to come during the pandemic, they might issue you this letter and you can come. As you know, with respect to what will happen in the new year, I'm not a fortune teller. I don't know. Hopefully we'll, see some improvement and things will normalize. I don't believe there's any other questions that we'll address at this time, but please feel free to reach out to us with any questions that weren't answered, and we'll be happy to get back to you.
Yeah, so I believe that is all we have time for today. So I would just like to thank everyone for attending the webinar, and I would also like to thank the panelists for sharing their expert insight. I'd encourage everyone to sign up to our alerts and follow us on social media to keep up to date on the latest developments on Canadian immigration. And again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to the panelists. The information is provided on screen, or you can contact me directly at info@gans.com. Until next time, everybody, stay safe.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Take care.